Hey everyone out there, minasan. How are you? Today, I have a question. Do you know what the English slang phrase dime a dozen means? Well, don't worry about that. You will learn what this means right after this on our Social English Snacks Edition.
皆さんこんにちは。毎日少しずつ社交に使える英語の上達を目指すソーシャルイングリッシュポッドキャストへようこそ。今日はぜひもっと自信を持って英会話してみましょう。Are you ready, Percy? Let's go!
Hey, minasan. Welcome to the Social English Podcast. Hikari, arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you for that introduction. This is the Social English Podcast, the podcast to help you speak a little social English every single day. Today, we have a Social English Snacks episode. In Social English Snacks, I will teach you an English phrase or word of English slang used in conversation. Conversational English, but not just conversational, but social English. English used in social situations, okay? Now, if you are listening to this podcast, you want to learn more English and social English, okay? That's what we're here for. Learn how to speak the English that we use in real social situations, okay? So, again, today is a Social English Snacks episode where we learn a slang word or phrase. So, one more time. This is the phrase, dime a dozen. Do you know what dime a dozen means?
今日はクイズをしましょう。この単語を英語で理解できるかどうかをテストする準備はできていますか？今日、私たちは別のこれはどういう意味ですか？エピソード。今日、私たちは現代の本物の話し言葉の英語で使われている単語やフレーズを教えます。エピソードの終わりまで聞いてください。あなたは今日あなたが学んだことに驚くでしょう。始めましょ
う。Okay, that was the Japanese version of what today's episode is about. For all of my awesome Japanese listeners, thank you for listening to my show. Okay, so have you figured out what dime a dozen means? Well, let me tell you what the slang phrase dime a dozen means. It was used a lot in the 1970s. This slang phrase means easy to get, cheap, or low value. Okay? So, here is an example. Okay? You have three friends. Okay? Joe, Bob, and Billy. Joe, Bob, and Billy are talking about getting a free school, university towel. Okay? Here is the conversation. Hey, Bob, yeah. What's going on? Well, did you go to the student center to get a towel today? No, I didn't. Those things are a dime a dozen. I got 3 already yesterday. Wow. Okay, so in that dialogue, in that conversation, the friends are talking about towels for this university towels. Think hand towel or summer towels to use. And the towels the school are giving have the school emblem, the school image on the towels. One friend thinks, Joe, he thinks that it's hard to get towels, but Jimmy tells him, no, it's easy. I already have 3. So these towels are not of high value and difficult to get. These towels are easy to get. Okay? Easy to get. Okay? So, once again, let's go to some examples. Here are examples of the slang phrase dime a dozen used in social English. Please listen. Remember, dime a dozen means. The meaning is cheap, low price, easy to get. Please listen to this. 聞いてください.
Investors know that ideas are a dime a dozen, but execution is what really matters. So if you're not showing things like initial customers or partnerships or accolades, investors might just say no.
And boy, people like this are in hot demand. Observers like me are a dime a dozen, and pencil-pushing theorists are a dime a dozen. But someone who knows how to design and build instruments and use them for scientific work, that's a dying breed, in part because too few universities have access to their own private facilities where this
Looks like a copycat of everything else. Then I
Right,
start to
right.
worry.
But they've pieced together their menu from
Yeah.
other people's menus by looking on the
Or a
web.
consultant, which is a thing these days. Cocktail consultants are a dime a dozen, and they come and put together menus, and there's not really a bar manager necessarily doing that. But when I walk into the bar,
really want is I believe that success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And I really want people to be fulfilled even more so because billionaires, that sounds ridiculous, but they're a dime a dozen. That's an exaggeration, meaning lots of people become billionaires. What's a hell of a lot more rare is someone who loves life every single day and stays happy when it doesn't go their way. There's nothing worse than an
この章を気に入っていただけたら5つ星のレビューをぜひお願いします。コメントは英語か日本語でお書きいただければ喜んで読ませていただきます。リアルソーシャルイングリッシュ .com にアクセスしてぜひ無料でダウンロードしてください。ほとんどの日本人の英語を勉強している人がやってしまいがちな7つの間違いとその正しい言い方。また毎日英語を上達させるのに役立つ資料もたくさんあります。Apple Podcast、Google Podcast、Stitcher、そして今はパンドラでもポッドキャストを購読いただきます。支援者になっていただけませんか？私たちがこの賞を作るための支援として5ドルの寄付をお願いできませんか？今後のエピソードで感謝の気持ちをお伝えします。また、そこでしか利用できない新しいコンテンツも入手できます。patreon.com/socialenglish からご参加ください。ソーシャルメディアで私たちのポッドキャストを友達にシェアしたり、Twitter、Facebook、Instagram のフォローをお願いします。
Okay, so for a dime a dozen, this phrase is taught actually in many eikaiwa in Japan or conversational English schools. Dime a dozen, I'm covering it today because it is still used, but I would consider it to be more of kind of an older English slang that's going away. So you can hear it sometimes in some speech, but in normal social English conversation, it's not used very much, but it is useful to understand and know. Because older people, 35, 40, 50, 60, may use dime a dozen a lot when they have a conversation, okay? So that's why I'm teaching you dime a dozen today. My action item for you, my listener today, is you think about talking about something that is a dime a dozen in your country. If it's in Japan, what is a dime a dozen? My listeners in Japan, what is a dime a dozen? My South Korea listeners, what is a dime a dozen in South Korea? Okay, maybe it's kimchi. I don't know. To my listeners in the Philippines, what is a dime a dozen? South American listeners, what is a dime a dozen? And to my English speakers or English students and learners that are in the UK, the United States, and Australia that listen to this podcast, what is a dime a dozen in that country? Practice a conversation with a friend of yours and ask them what is a dime a dozen, and you tell them what is a dime a dozen, okay? So that is it for today's Social English Podcast Snacks Edition. I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for listening to me. I appreciate it very much. Before I go, I want to say, please tell your friends about this podcast. Mention it to them. I would really appreciate that if you do that, okay? Peace and love. Have a great week.
今日は楽しい時間をありがとうございました。ぜひ私たちのウェブサイト realsocialenglish.com を訪問して日本語訳と役立つ情報を手に入れてください。また次回お会いしましょう。バイバイ。See you next time. Bye bye.